Of today's video is endangered species and its relevancy to the martial arts. You got me thinking about this because I read an article not too long ago. It was talking about pandas being taken off the endangered species list, and that, you know, they're no longer part of the endangered species. And it started to get me to think about endangered species in general and how civilization has developed to the point where a lot of these wildlife animals are becoming endangered. You know, used for what they could be used for. Ever since the invention of technology and science, humans have exploited the animals and taken over the animal kingdom, and a lot of these animals that normally would be, the owners of the wildlife, they end up getting killed by the humans, taken advantage of. So, for example, these elephants would be killed, for profit, for their tusks or whatever it is, and certain animals would be killed for their fur, and sharks should be slayed, lions and tigers, and these animals of the wildlife, there's something beautiful and powerful about them, but we cannot live side by side with them in the city. So a lot of these animals are killed off, and sometimes, these people that are trying to retain the wildlife, they're trying to prevent the killing of these animals so then they could, their species could be preserved. So it's like you got something like beautiful, like a lion, but you cannot find a lion here in the city, in the States, unless you go to the zoo. They just cannot exist in the city life. But if you go to Africa, you'll see them there. Certain parts of Africa. So it gets me to think about the relation of the martial arts. I feel that the real martial artists are like an endangered species. It's like rare to see a real martial artist. To me, I liken it to the lion and the tiger. You cannot just see a tiger or a lion just anywhere in America, just walking around in the streets. No, like, the only way that you'll see him is in a zoo, trapped in a cage. In order to see the real lions, you gotta go to Africa. Lions in the wildlife. So, looking at the real martial artists, like, for example, to me, like, Bruce Lee was a real martial artist, but you don't see that often. When I talk about real martial artists, I'm not necessarily saying, hey, these people are better than other people. I'm just saying martial artists in its purest form. Somebody that practices martial arts in its purest form. Like, when I say endangered species, like pandas, for example, aren't better than lions, but they're endangered as much as lions are endangered, as much as sharks are endangered. It's just rare to see those animals. Like, you can't just walk around in America and just find a panda. Like, you're gonna have to go to China to see these pandas, because they only exist over there. These lions only exist in Africa. So, like, the real martial arts, it might only exist in China. And then if you do find a real martial artist in America, it's like as uncommon as finding a lion or a panda in America. And in order to find one, it's gotta be like preserved and almost locked up in a cage where it's not really free. So it's like the martial artists in America, the real martial artists, it's like they're either locked up in a cage and not free, meaning they're not allowed to really express themselves truthfully, otherwise they get killed off. And that's exactly what happened to Bruce Lee. He brought the real martial artists to America, and then he gets killed off. And he has one son, Brandon Lee, who is almost like a baby cub of a lion, and then his son gets killed off. So it's like if you only got two lions that exist in America and they both get killed off, then the whole species dies in America. Now, there's gonna be more lions in Africa, just like there's more real martial artists in China. But every time they come to America, they get killed off because it doesn't really fit in with the city life. Like the lion can exist in Africa because the environment is set up for them to exist in the wildlife. But the same type of environment is not available in America. So as soon as they come to America, they're gonna get killed off. They can't just roam free. So they got to get locked in a cage and thrown into a zoo in order to exist. But they're not existing in their totality because they're imprisoned. So that's like the real martial artist in America who can't really be honest with his expression because he's going to get killed off. So it's rare to find a real martial artist in America because this is not the environment for it. When I talk about real martial arts, I'm talking about the integration of the body, mind, and spirit. I'm talking about like a high level of fitness development, natural. No steroids, no cheating, no nothing, just natural fitness development to a high level. I'm talking about combative development in all areas, unarmed and armed, and to a very high level. Not towards tournaments, not towards games, but towards street survival. But almost everything available in America is all adapted to sport, which is not, in my eyes, the real martial arts. So Taekwondo would have their Olympic sparring, and karate will have their tournaments, Muay Thai will have their tournaments, cage fighting, MMA will have their tournaments, boxing has their tournaments, wrestling has their tournaments, everything has their tournaments. And those are not the real martial arts. Real martial arts to me is like what Bruce Lee would study, the science behind true survival on the streets, unarmed and armed. And that's rare to find a real martial artist that trains in pure arts, that's not adapted to the sport, but is essentially developed for survival on the streets. And then I'm also talking about spiritual development as far as heading towards the way of meditation. I'm not talking about Christianity, I'm not talking about Catholicism, I'm not talking about the Western religions. I'm talking about the way towards meditation, the teachings of Buddha, Lao Tzu. I'm talking about those teachings. I'm talking about that integration, body, mind, and spirit, meditation, combative development for the streets, and fitness development in a natural, healthy way, free from steroids and things like that. That's what I'm talking about when I refer to the real martial arts, and that's what I'm saying is what represents more of what the endangered species would represent, like the lions and the pandas or whatever animals that are endangered. It's like a rarity to find those types of animals, just like it's a rarity to find the real martial artist who develops himself in those areas of which I specified. And the reason why it doesn't exist in America, or you don't really find it in America, is because the environment does not, it's not the right environment. You know, if you could put a real martial artist in America from China, you know, he's surrounded by Christians and Catholics. He's surrounded by, you know, people that are highly competitive and egoistic, not meditative at all. He's surrounded by combat sport fighters, not people who train for the streets. He's surrounded by people who are either obese and overweight or people on steroids and other performance enhancing drugs that are not really training naturally to develop themselves in the fitness area. He's surrounded by things that are opposite of what the martial arts is. So that's like the lion from Africa coming to America. He can't survive because the environment is not set up for him to survive. So the only way he can survive is to go into captivity where he's being pretty much nurtured by the zookeepers. So that's like the martial artist who goes into his own private training, his own private ways, away from the masses. He needs to preserve, you know, his ways against the majority. The majority is gonna try to influence him towards the opposite of what he wishes to develop, and he cannot give into that if he wishes to preserve his own true way. I see a lot of similarities, you know, and it's not hard to kill them all off. I mean, if there's only, say, 10 lions that exist in America in the zoos, for example, you could kill all 10 of them and now they don't exist at all. You know, so if you got real martial artists in America and there's only 10 of them, and you just kill them all off, then they don't exist anymore. So it's like a Bruce Lee, he's dead, his son is dead, and then pretty much the bloodlines are dead. Doesn't exist anymore. Unless the new lion from China is brought over back to America to start all over again. So they're even talking about that gorilla that got shot and killed because that toddler got inside the enclosure. They ended up shooting and killing that gorilla, and they said that was a huge loss because that gorilla is an endangered species, and for them to kill her like that, it really was a big setback towards trying to repopulate that species. And that's what's happening with the real martial arts, is like when you got somebody like Bruce Lee who gets killed off, that's a huge setback towards the promotion of real martial arts in America. So if Bruce Lee's dead, Brandon Lee's dead, then who else is going to be representing the real martial arts in America? It's up to the people that have it in their hearts to do so. If you choose the path of the real martial arts, you become a part of that endangered species. And you'll be training, working hard for the rest of your life, trying to represent the real martial arts in America. Just like these lions in America, are going to be held in captivity in the zoo for the rest of their lives, living a life of imprisonment. It's impossible for them to be free in America. They just can't. It's not, the environment is not designed for their survival. So as soon as they're let go to go free in America, they're gonna get killed. So it's either they live in an imprisoned way within the zoo, or they try to live in the city and then they end up getting killed. And those are the only two options. Or they get shipped back to Africa and then they could go back to the wildlife. But to exist in America, you're either imprisoned or you're dead. So look at Bruce Lee and Brandon Lee. They're dead. Not really through natural causes. It's through, their lives were taken earlier than necessary. They didn't live their full natural potential lifespan. So you're either dead or you got to live in America and pretty much remain hidden. You gotta live in captivity. You gotta live in an imprisoned lifestyle in order to stay alive. Like you're stuck in a zoo, behind bars. And it's interesting because even before Bruce died, when he was born, they said that he was born a dragon, but then they wanted to protect him from the evil spirits. So then they gave him like a woman's name, Jun Fan, which is a woman's name, in order to trick the spirits into believing that it's a woman so they don't kill him off. And then later on he ended up getting killed off anyway. So it's like, when you're a martial artist, a real martial artist, you gotta go into hiding. If you express yourself too much, you're too opinionated, you put yourself out there too much, then they kill you. And I've already learned the hard way through experience. If I'm too vocal about my opinions on certain things, I get eliminated. I get killed. So I either censor everything I say, or I just don't exist at all. Those are my two options. I either get censored or I get eliminated completely. There's no freedom. There's no freedom of expression. If you practice the real martial arts, there's no freedom of expression for you. It doesn't exist. There might be freedom of expression for you if you don't practice the real martial arts. That's like being a squirrel or something. A squirrel out there, you go everywhere you want. You're within the city. You could go jumping on the trees. You could run around the road, on the streets. You could go in the forest. You could do whatever you want being a squirrel. But if you're a lion, you can't just go out there in the streets, in the city. No, you're either going to get shot and killed, or you're going to get put in prison and go back to the zoo. So that's like the real martial artist in America. You can't be free because you get killed. You have to censor yourself. And, I just see so many direct parallels with it. And people should pay attention and just look at that and see that. It's not just with the martial arts, but people like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X, for example. Intelligent, inspiring, charismatic black leaders protesting social injustices. They get killed right before your eyes. Live ammunition killed off. That's direct proof of what I'm talking about. So it may take decades or an entire lifetime to take an animal off of the endangered species list, but it takes a lot of work towards preserving that species. So with the real martial arts, it takes a lot of work of developing and training people to represent the real martial arts. And slowly, if it starts building, then maybe one day it'll no longer be endangered. The martial artists in America might no longer be endangered. That's always a possibility.